Well, there was this group of kids that they were all friends, and they loved playing sports. So in baseball season, they were playing baseball. And in football season, they were playing football. And in basketball season, they were playing basketball. And they were always playing together. But out of the whole group, Kenny was the best athlete. And no matter what they played, he was the best. And sometimes this group of friends, they would meet up with other groups of friends, and they would play against them. And they would usually win because of Kenny. But one day, Kenny didn't show up. He wasn't there. And as they played, they were losing. And they all knew why. And they started talking amongst themselves, and they were saying, if only Kenny was here. We need Kenny. Well, I think we can relate to this idea. Sometimes we look around at our world, and it's a mess. I mean, immorality seems to rule the day. People and countries are constantly fighting. And everyone is selfish and only looking out for themselves. And human culture is turning further and further from God. And we say, if only Jesus was here. We need the King. And back in Micah's day, God is telling them that they are going into exile because of their sin. And they won't have a king. And they'll be weak. And their enemies will trample them. But that's not the end. Things may be bad, but the King is coming. He will make things right. He will make things righteous. And he will bring strength and security and peace. In fact, when he comes, there will be world peace. Look at chapter 4, Micah chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion, that's another name for Jerusalem, out of Zion shall come forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And so Micah begins here by speaking of the distant future. He calls them the latter days. He had just before this had spoken of the near future and said Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. But that won't be the end of Jerusalem or the end of God's people. And so here we see that in a later time, Jerusalem will become a very important and thriving city. Jerusalem here is called the mountain of the house of the Lord because it's the mountain where the temple is. And so, but Micah says that it will be established as the highest of the mountains. Now, this isn't speaking of physical height because it's not the highest or tallest mountain in the area. But it's speaking of prominence. It will be the focal point of the entire world. And it will be the place of power and rule. There will also be a constant flow of people coming to Jerusalem and coming to the temple from all over the world. They will come because they want to learn God's truth and God's ways so they can live right before God. And so not only will Israel and Judah have a change of heart and want to know God and know God's word and want to be faithful to him and obedient to him, but the whole world will have that change of heart and will want to be obedient to him. The whole world will seek God's truth. And so they will come to Jerusalem where God's word is taught. Verse 3. He shall judge between many peoples and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. And so not only will people come to Jerusalem to learn God's word, but they will come for God himself to settle their disputes. So God is the all-wise judge, and he will act as arbitrator between the peoples of the earth, between people from all the nations of the world. Even the powerful and distant nations will come for God to settle their disputes. And because of this, there will be peace. There will be no war, and there will be no threat of attack under God's rule. And so there's no need for weapons of war, no need to protect yourself. And so he says that they will use the materials from their weapons to make farming tools so they can grow their crops with them. And so since there's no fear of being attacked, everyone will grow their crops at ease, and they'll sit in the shade of their trees. It will be a time of total peace and prosperity because of God's rule on earth. Now, notice that this tells us specifically that God is ruling. But Micah has and will also speak of the king ruling at this time with divine authority. There is a close identification between God and the king, and that's for good reason. Because this is looking forward to the rule of Jesus in the millennial kingdom. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the king. And Jesus is God. Now, here's something interesting. Outside the United Nations building, there's a statue that has the words about beating swords into plowshares. It's actually taken from Isaiah, but Isaiah uses the same picture, pretty much the same words. But they have that there to call for peace and to call for an end of all war. But they haven't been successful. And they won't be successful. Because sinful people will never be able to establish unbroken peace. They will never be able to remove all threat of war. Because people are selfish and self-centered. I mean, there are many people who would be happy with peace as long as everybody's doing everything the way I want them to. But as soon as they step out of line, no, there's trouble. But one day, there will be world peace, but only under the perfect rule of God. Verse 5. For all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. So first, let me remind you that when you read in the Old Testament and you see the word Lord in all caps, L-O-R-D, that is actually the name of God, Yahweh, the name of God. It's translating the name of God, Yahweh, the name that God had told Moses, this is my name. And so here, Micah says that we walk in the name of Yahweh, our God, forever and ever. But Micah is excited by this vision that he has just seen of the future. And he is so glad that he belongs to God. And so he declares his loyalty to God. But in doing so, he also makes a statement about God's greatness. You see, the nations of the world, they follow their false gods. But the people of Israel, at least the faithful people of Israel, follow the true God. And they live in reliance on him and live to be faithful to him. But those false gods that the people of the world follow, those false gods of this world will come to an end. They will be shown to be as impotent as they are. They will no longer be followed. But God, Yahweh, is forever. God is eternal. He and his rule are forever. That means that there is a very good future ahead, at least for those who are in relationship with him. But there is a good future ahead. And if only God's rule lasts forever, well, doesn't it make good sense to just submit to him now? Submit to him fully now. Well, Micah has more good news. Look at verse 6 and 7. In that day, declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away, and those whom I have afflicted. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation. And the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion from this time forth and forevermore. So as Micah looks ahead to this new day, this new era in history, he envisions both a nearer future and a more distant future. And so in the nearer future, Israel will return from exile. But in the more distant future, the ultimate fulfillment of the prophecy will be the establishment of the millennial kingdom. And so he mentions here the lame and those who have been driven away and the afflicted. These are the people of Israel who will have been taken off into exile and have suffered in exile. They've been disciplined by God, but God isn't finished with them. You see, God will make the remnant out of those broken people. He will make a strong nation out of those who were helplessly driven from their land. God will gather the remnant and he will lead them, and he will have his relationship with them will last forever because he is king forever. Verse 8. And you, O tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you shall it come, the former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is referred to here as the tower of the flock. And so Jerusalem is being pictured as a fortified defense. The point is that God is going to watch over his people as their king. And the kingship and rule will return. So the kingship, like they had under David and Solomon, will be restored in Jerusalem. Verse 9. Now, why do you cry aloud? Is there no king in you? Has your counselor perished? That pain seized you like a woman in labor? Writhe and groan, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. For now you shall go out from the city and dwell in the open country. You shall go to Babylon. There you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. So verse 9 starts with the word now. Now, this is more than just a transition to a new thought. He's been talking about the glorious distant future, but now he's turning to the near future, the near not so good future. Before everything is great, Jerusalem will be conquered and will be without a king. And he compares this terrible time to the pain of giving birth. They will suffer and they will be taken out of the land into exile as an act of discipline, as God cleanses his people. And you'll notice that he says they will go to Babylon. But you may remember that the current threat right now to Israel and Judah is the Assyrians. But Babylon will rise to power after the Assyrians. And this mention of Babylon speaks to that delay of Judah's exile that we talked about last week because of Hezekiah's repentance. But then things continue to deteriorate, and they are taken off into exile by Babylon. But then Micah quickly comes back to good news. You see, God will rescue them from Babylon. And this is important because when they hear that they're going to lose their king, they're going to be taken out of the land, it may cause them to question God's promises and to wonder if he's done with them. But God reassures them that even though they will go into exile, that it will not last forever. God will not abandon them forever. There was a little boy who, whenever he was walking with his parents, the parents would want to hold his hand so he wouldn't wander off or get lost or get hurt. But he was always pulling his hand away. He always wanted to go off on his own and do his own thing. And so one day his dad let him. He let him experience what it would be like without dad. But he kept an eye on him from a distance where the boy couldn't see. And so the boy started wandering around and he was doing his thing. And then all of a sudden, he suddenly realized he was alone and he needed his parents. At that time, Dad showed up out of nowhere and rescued him. And the boy learned his lesson. He learned to stay close. He learned to obey. And the exile was kind of like that. You see, God says, you don't want me? Okay, I'll let you see what it's like to live on your own. Experience life on your own. It doesn't last forever. But they were taken so they could learn their lesson. Verse 11. Now many nations are assembled against you, saying, let her be defiled, and let our eyes gaze upon Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he has gathered them as sheaves to the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, for I will make your horn iron, and I will make your hoofs bronze. In other words, I'm going to make you strong. You shall beat in pieces many peoples, and shall devote their gain to the Lord, their wealth to the Lord of the whole earth. And so there are different nations that are attacking Jerusalem, and they want to take it for themselves. And they're gloating about conquering Judah. And they're pretty proud of themselves and their ability to win the war, win these battles. But God points out that they don't understand what's really happening. That God will allow them to conquer his people as discipline on his people. They don't know what God is doing. They don't know God's plan. But then these conquering nations are pictured as sheaves of wheat that have been brought to a threshing floor. And like wheat that is beaten on the floor in order to separate the grains from the chaff, these evil people, these nations will be beaten to pieces. And all of their wealth that they have gained through war and through building their empires will belong to God. Because the whole world will submit to God and his rule. Chapter 5, verse 1. Now muster your troops, O daughter of troops. Siege is laid against us. With a rod they strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. Okay, so Micah's back to his present time. And God tells them to get ready because they're about to be attacked by their enemies. Their enemies will hit the judge of Israel on the cheek. In other words, the king, the judge of Israel is the king. The king will be humiliated. Jerusalem will be overthrown and the king will be removed. Verse 2, but you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. So the king will be removed, but this is not the end of kingship. The king will be restored. And God tells them that a king will come in the future. Now remember earlier, God or Yahweh himself is the ruler. But here, we're talking about a human king. And we're told a few things about this king. First of all, God says that this king, he will come to rule for me. In other words, he won't just do his own thing, but he will serve God and will do God's will. Secondly, this king will come from the small and seemingly insignificant town of Bethlehem. By the way, when the wise men came to Israel looking for the king whose star they saw from the east, they asked, where do we find the king? And the people said, go to Bethlehem. This is where they found that. The king will come from Bethlehem. And so this king is being born in Bethlehem, and that's significant because it connects him with David, the great king, who was also from Bethlehem. Thirdly, we're told about this king that his coming is from of old, from ancient days. Now, this is an interesting statement because it could refer to two things. On one hand, it could refer to the king being connected to the ancient history of Israel, and this would fit the immediate context because it connects him again to David, back to the king. And so this coming king is a descendant of David. And this is a restoration of the Davidic kingship. On the other hand, this could refer even further back, meaning into eternity past. And so this would be speaking of the supernatural nature of this future king. But here's the thing. We know that both of those things are true. This is looking forward to Jesus, who is the forever king, who is a man in the line of David, and who is the eternal God who existed before time. Verse 3. Therefore, he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. And so the king, his coming shows that God is abandoning his people to exile, but this abandonment is only temporary. Like labor pains end with the joy of the birth of a baby, Israel will have a time of suffering, but it will end with restoration and joy. And Israel, and when the king comes, all of Israel, so both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom that was divided, they will all be together as one kingdom. And the king will bring peace, rest. He will bring an end to their troubles, and he will provide peace. And he will provide security because he will conquer all of his enemies and will rule over the entire earth. Verse 5. And he shall be their peace, When the Assyrian comes into our land and treads in our places, then we will rise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. They shall shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod at its entrances. And he shall deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes into our land and treads within our borders. Our border. So this continues the idea of the king bringing peace to his people. He says that others will attack them. He mentions specifically the Assyrians, but the Assyrians are being used typologically here. In other words, as an example of any number of enemies who are coming against Israel. And so others will attack, but the king will lead his people and will deliver them from all of their enemies. The 7 shepherds and the 80 princes mentioned here are a picture of the great resources committed to this king and at his service. In other words, this king is powerful and will bring total peace to his people. Verse 7. Then the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many peoples, like dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which delay not for a man, nor wait for the children of man. And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the nations, in the midst of many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lamb among the flocks of sheep, which when it goes through treads down and tears in pieces, and there is none to deliver. Your hand shall be lifted up over your adversaries, and all your enemies shall be cut off. Okay, so now the focus turns on the remnant being led by the king. And although the remnant is sent into exile and is now weak, the remnant, if you remember, was earlier called the lame. The Israelites were called the lame, so they're weak, but they won't be destroyed, and they will become strong. And the nations won't be able to keep them down or control them. And Micah uses 2 metaphors to illustrate this. The first is that of dew or rain. You see, the dew and the rain are sent by God, and people can do nothing to stop it or to change it, to control it. The second metaphor is of animals. See, the animals in the forest and sheep, they can't stand up to a lion. They can't stop a lion from tearing it to pieces, from killing it and eating it. They just can't stand up to him. But the point is that Israel's enemies won't be able to stand against them. That God will be with the remnant, and they will become strong and unstoppable. The king is coming, and there will be no stopping him. You know, these prophecies about the king and his kingdom are given specifically to Israel. But as Christians, we are also looking forward to the return of the king. Their king is also our king. And as believers in Jesus, we also get to share in his kingdom. And we look forward to the day when life on earth will be just, will be moral, will be good. Jesus is king forever, and he will come. There will come a day when all people of the earth will submit to Jesus. And they will want to know and live in God's ways. And at that time, there will be peace on earth. And at that time, all the false gods that people bow down to, all the things that people put in God's place, all those false gods will be shown to be impotent and will be done away with. But until then, people will continue to go on their ways and oppose God. And the world is worse off because of it. Because we're not living right. Because we suffer, because we in the world are not living right, we suffer the consequences of sin. Romans 1 tells us that people have rejected God, and they put other things in the place of God in their lives. They put other things, they devote themselves to other things. They worship other things. They follow other things. And as a result, Romans continues to tell us that God has let them go their way. It says that he gave them up to a depraved mind. In other words, he let them go into their depravity, into their sin, and they don't think straight. You see, God says, well, if you don't want me, okay, go your way and experience life on your own. And things have gotten worse and worse. And we see this in our culture today, even. I mean, we've twisted the truth and twisted reality so far that people will argue against obvious facts and will argue against common sense and will do whatever they want to do. They will argue for nonsense in order to justify sin. And if you were to say that sex outside of marriage is wrong, or if you were to say that homosexuality is wrong, or if you say that a man can't be a woman and a woman can't be a man, they will attack you. And they will be so bewildered that you could be so stupid. They reject God. And they think they've made things better for themselves. But they don't understand what's really happening. And sadly, they will one day find themselves that they are on the threshing floor. That they've walked themselves into judgment. Don't follow the ways of the blind, ignorant, and arrogant world. Instead, submit to Jesus. Just a few more verses, and they beg the question, where do you find strength? Chapter 5, verse 10. And in that day declares the Lord, I will cut off your horses from among you, and will destroy your chariots, and I will cut off the cities of your land, and throw down all your strongholds, and I will cut off sorceries from your hand, and you shall have no more tellers of fortunes, and I will cut off your carved images, and your pillars from among you, and you shall bow down no more to the work of your hands, and I will root out your Asherah images from among you, and destroy your cities, and in anger and wrath I will execute vengeance on the nations that did not obey. God is going to remove all the things that Israel has wrongly put their trust in instead of God. They were supposed to trust in God, but they have put their trust in horses and chariots and fortresses and walled cities and in fortune tellers and in idols. And when the king comes, all those things will be gone. And Israel will realize that true security is found only in God. They will learn this because God will judge the nations who have rejected him. And Jesus the King will defeat all of Israel's enemies who oppose God. And God's sovereign power and control over all people will be clearly seen. Then they will understand that true security is found only in God. So where do you find strength? There is no one stronger than God, and only God is completely trustworthy. And only the things of God will last forever. But we still tend to trust in other things. But one day we'll realize that true strength and security are found only in God. But why wait for one day? Think about these things now. What weak things are you trusting in? What worldly things are you devoting yourself to that don't deserve devotion? In what are you seeking peace that can't really offer peace? Find strength and hope and joy and peace and contentment in God. The King is coming, and it's a good thing because we need the King. There is a lot in our world that is just not good. But when Jesus comes again, everything will be set right. But until then, let's not just look at them out there. Let's not just complain about other people, their ideas, or their sin. Let's take a look at our own lives. And let's seek God and ask Him what He wants to do in our lives. We know He wants us to be holy. We know He wants us to faithfully serve Him. We know He wants us to rely on Him and live by the Spirit and keep growing day by day. Well, the King is coming. So let's keep growing until the day He comes. Let's keep growing. Let's live in anticipation of His return. Let's live ready for the King to come.